Psalm chapter 3 begins with a title. It says, "A Psalm of David when he fled from his son Absalom." I want to set that off to the side because I have some things to say about it, but they're not the point of this video. Psalm chapter 3 begins with a lament. It says, "O Lord, how many are my foes? Many are rising against me. Many are saying to me, there is no help for you in God." Now this is an interesting introduction because if you recall in our last video, we looked at Psalm chapter 1. And what scholars would say is that Psalm chapter 1 has been intentionally placed as the beginning of the entire collection of the Psalms. It's as if the editors are saying, if you're going to understand what's going on throughout, you have to understand Psalm 1. Most scholars, to be honest, would say you have to understand Psalm 1 and Psalm 2. They are both together as an introduction, but that doesn't really affect our major point in this video. Psalm chapter 1, it contrasts the righteous and the wicked. The righteous will prosper. The righteous meditate on the Torah. The righteous will be protected by God. The Lord, it says, will watch over their way. Whereas the wicked are like chaff. The wind drives them away. In fact, their way will perish. Now, what's interesting about this is you have in the introduction this theological framework for understanding the whole book. And it doesn't take but one psalm. If we put Psalm 1 and Psalm 2 as the introduction, Psalm 3 says, yeah, but. It begins, I have foes. And not only do I have foes, I have a lot of foes. And if you think about what the framework is saying, basically, it's retribution theology. It's the good get good and the bad get bad. But then when real life and experience happens, the psalmist says, no, that's not how it works. I'm following Yahweh, yet I have enemies surrounding me. In fact, Psalm 3 is a petitionary psalm where the psalmist has to say, God, do what you're supposed to do. Rise up, deliver me. In the latter half of verse 7, we get into some kind of dicey theology there that we can also talk about for another day. All I want us to see here is if we have these two psalms at the outset that provide a framework for us understanding the Psalms, and then the very first one that begins the Psalms proper, it's pushing back on the theology by saying, I am following, and I'm not prospering in the way that some of us have understood. In fact, I have enemies and they're surrounding me and I don't know what to do. And the only thing I can do here is to cry out to you, God, to do something, to deliver me. And the honesty that we see here is striking, right? We have a psalmist who is calling God to task and is involving him or herself in this dialogue that is filled with raw emotions, filled with uncertainty, filled with the difficulties of their life and the fact that they have so many people around them threatening them. And the psalmist is looking back and saying, do what you said you would do back here. And somewhere along the way, I think our prayer life has been derailed there. And this example of one sort of calling God to task has been lost. And I would encourage us as we consider Psalm chapter 3 to maybe allow ourselves to petition, to allow ourselves to be honest about what's going on in the world around us, to be honest about our own uncertainty and our fear and our anxiety, and to be able to say, rise up and deliver me. I'm hopeful that what we learn from the language of the Psalms is a language that we can adopt for ourselves. This is not just an ancient book of Israel's old prayers of praise and thanksgiving and lament. These are prayers that we too can adopt for ourselves in the midst of the uncertainties that we go through in our lives. And what we have in the very beginning of the book of Psalms is an example of one who is crying aloud to the Lord and waiting for the Lord to answer. And perhaps that's where you find yourself today. I would encourage you to keep raising your voice, to use some of the language of the prayers of God's people in the Old Testament in the book of Psalms, and to adopt it as your own as we struggle for words as to what it is that's going on in our moment in time. Maybe we ask the Lord to rise up. Maybe we also claim that deliverance belongs to the Lord. We're going to put the words of this psalm up on the screen and just give you guys a couple of moments to read over it, to meditate on it. I'm sure that a full reading will elicit a lot of questions, but perhaps you could also begin to move into a time where you have honest conversations with God with regard to your own uncertainty and to your own need for petition in your life.